The first thing Ryan Lawson ever said to me was, "I have rules. Not hello, not nice to meet you, not even a nod. Just that flat, cool declaration delivered from behind a clipboard, an actual clipboard with paper on it. Like we were in a corporate orientation and not standing in the hallway of a shared apartment that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood. I'd barely gotten my duffel bag through the door. He was tall. That was the second thing I noticed, right after the clipboard. Broad-shouldered in a gray Henley that had been washed so many times it fit him like a second skin. Dark hair cut close on the sides, a little longer on top, and eyes the color of deep river water. That particular shade of green-brown that changes depending on how the light hits it. Strong jaw, lips pressed into a line that could have been called a mouth if it ever smiled. It did not smile. Rules, I repeated, setting my bag down carefully because something about this man made me want to be careful. Okay. He held out the clipboard. I took it. The list was typed, single-spaced, 2 pages, front and back. I skimmed the headers. Kitchen protocol, bathroom scheduling, guest policy, noise parameters, shared space maintenance, utility, responsibility, temperature govern, temperature, governance. These are thorough, I managed. They work. He crossed his arms. Previous roommates had no structure. It created conflict. These eliminate conflict before it begins. I looked up from the list. He was watching me with that river water gaze, steady and unreadable, like he'd already assessed me and filed his report. I got the feeling the report wasn't glowing. "I'm Carol," I said. "Carol Adams." We spoke on the phone. A pause. Then, grudgingly, as if my name was a piece of information he was reluctant to accept, "Ryan." "Ryan Lawson." "Yeah, I remember." I smiled. He did not smile back. "Is there a quiz on these later, or read them before bed? Initial each section to confirm you've understood it. Leave the clipboard on the kitchen counter when you're done." He turned and walked back down the hallway. "I've labeled your shelf in the refrigerator." His door closed. I stood there in the entryway with a 2-page single-spaced house rule document in my hand, and I thought, this is going to be a disaster. I read the rules. All 47 of them. Some were reasonable. No dishes in the sink overnight. Replace shared supplies when they run out. Don't use the other person's toiletries. The kind of things any functional adult should do without being told. Some were specific to the point of being baffling. Rule 14. The television volume shall not exceed level 22 between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. Not 20. Not 25. 22. Why 22? Royal 27. Guests are permitted on weekends only between 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. with 24 hours advance notice. Overnight guests require a written request submitted no fewer than 48 hours in advance. Written request. For having someone sleep over. In my own home, Rule 31. Emotional disturbances, including but not limited to crying, shouting, or prolonged brooding, should be confined to private spaces. Prolonged brooding. He'd actually written that down. Prolonged brooding. Rule 43. Maintain a minimum social distance of 3 feet when passing in shared hallways. Rule 45. Do not touch the other occupant's belongings without explicit verbal permission. Rule 47. This document supersedes all verbal agreements made prior to move-in. I initialed every section. I left the clipboard on the kitchen counter. Then I sat on my bed in my new room, which was smaller than I'd hoped, but had a window that caught the afternoon light in a way that made it feel golden. And I thought about Ryan Lawson and his river water eyes and his clipboard and the word supersedes. And I felt something stir in my chest that I wasn't prepared to name. The first week was formal. We passed each other in the kitchen in the mornings like two diplomats from countries with a complicated history. Polite. Careful. I made coffee. He made whatever complicated pour-over ritual he performed every morning with a kettle that he heated to a specific temperature using an actual thermometer. I watched him do it once, this precise, unhurried ceremony, his hands steady and deliberate, and I thought, he does everything like this. Like it matters. Like every small thing is worth doing exactly right. It was annoying. It was also, if I'm being honest, which I'm trying to be, quietly compelling. He worked from home most days. Some kind of data analytics consulting that he never elaborated on, just said the word analytics with the same tone most people say, obviously, and considered the matter closed. I was 3 weeks into a new job at a design firm across town, still figuring out the commute, still learning everyone's names, still eating lunch at my desk because the break room felt like a social minefield. I came home tired. He was always already there. Sometimes when I came through the door, I could hear him on a call. His voice carrying from behind his closed door, clipped and authoritative, the voice of someone who had never once second-guessed his own analysis. Other times, the apartment was so quiet I'd check the windows to see if the world outside still existed. He cooked at 6:30 every evening. Not 6, not 7, 6:30. The smell of it would reach me wherever I was in the apartment, and it was always, always, something that smelled extraordinary. Garlic and herbs. Something slow-braised. Once, improbably, what turned out to be a perfect shakshuka on the fourth night. I was in the kitchen making sad pasta, the kind where you just boil noodles and put butter on them because it's 9 p.m. and you forgot to eat dinner and you have no energy to be a person. When he came out of his room, took one look at my pot and said without preamble, "That's not enough." "It's pasta," I said. "It's carbohydrates and fat. It's not a meal. It's a meal for tonight." He looked at me for a moment. Then he opened the refrigerator, pulled out leftovers in a glass container. The man used glass containers, labeled, dated, and put them in a pan on the stove without another word. 15 minutes later, there was a plate of actual food in front of me, something with lentils and roasted vegetables and a sauce that tasted like it had been simmering for hours. "I had extra," he said before I could say anything. "It would have gone to waste." He went back to his room. I ate alone at the kitchen table and tried very hard not to feel anything about it. The first rule he broke was Rule 43. 3 feet of minimum social distance in shared hallways. It happened on a Sunday morning, 3 weeks in. I was half asleep, making my way to the bathroom in the t-shirt and boxers I'd slept in, hair catastrophic, not entirely certain I was awake. He came out of the bathroom at the exact same moment. The hallway was narrow. We nearly collided. He caught my arm to steady me. His hand was warm. His grip was firm and certain, the kind of grip that says, "I have you," without any drama about it. He was close enough that I could smell his soap, something clean and faintly woody, and his expression, for just a moment, shifted. Something crossed his face that wasn't his usual careful blankness, something that looked almost like startled. Then he let go, stepped back. "Sorry," I said, because one of us had to say something. "My fault." His voice was slightly lower than usual. He cleared his throat. I should have waited. He went back into his room. I stood in the hallway for a second, my arm still warm where he touched it, and thought, The second rule he broke was Rule 27, the guest policy. My friend Petra came over on a Friday, not a weekend technically, and definitely without 24 hours advance notice, because she texted me from the lobby at 7 p.m. with a bottle of wine and the energy of someone who'd had a week and needed to debrief it. I let her in. She was loud and bright, and she talked with her hands, and she filled the apartment with a kind of chaos that I was fairly certain would register on Ryan Lawson's personal seismograph as a code red event. He came out of his office at 8, presumably for water, and stopped in the kitchen doorway. Petra was in the middle of a story involving her coworker, a stapler, and what she called the single most passive-aggressive email in the history of professional communication. She paused when she saw him. "Oh," she said, "you must be the roommate." He looked at me. I widened my eyes slightly in a way that I hoped communicated. "Please be normal for 5 minutes." "Ryan," he said. "Petra." She held out her hand and he shook it. This precise, professional handshake, and she looked him up and down with the unsettled assessment she applied to everything and everyone. "Carol talks about you." "I don't," I said immediately. "He does," she said, not looking at me. "He said you have rules." 47 of them, Ryan said, and something about his tone, dry, almost wry, made me look at him more carefully. Was that a joke? Was Ryan Lawson making a joke? "That's incredible," Petra said with complete sincerity. "I respect that. I need someone like you in my life. My life has no structure." A pause. Then, Unmistakably, the corner of his mouth moved upward, just slightly, just for a moment. That's apparent. She laughed. He almost smiled. He got his water and went back to his room, and Petra turned to me with an expression I recognized as dangerous. He's gorgeous, she said. Stop. Carol, I live with him. Stop. She stopped talking about it. But she kept looking at his closed door with the expression of someone who has spotted something interesting that she fully intends to revisit. He never mentioned the unauthorized weeknight guest. The 24-hour notice requirement went unaddressed. Rule 27, technically, had been suspended. I told myself it meant nothing. He left a book on the kitchen table in the 4th week. I didn't notice it at first. Just saw it sitting there next to the fruit bowl, face down. A thick paperback with a worn spine. When I picked it up to move it, I saw the title. It was a novel I'd mentioned in passing, weeks ago, in the context of a conversation about something else entirely. I'd said something like, "Oh, I've always meant to read that," and moved on before he could respond. He'd apparently filed it. There was no note, no explanation, just the book, left where I would find it. I put it back exactly where it had been, like it was something fragile, and then I stood there for a moment with a feeling in my chest like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air changes and you know something is coming but you don't know what shape it will take. I read the book in 4 days, left it back on the table with a post-it note that said, "Devastating. Recommend." It was gone by morning. The month turned. The weather shifted, the city shedding autumn for something colder and more serious, and the apartment became a place I thought about during the day, which was new. I'd always been someone who maintained a very clear separation between the spaces of my life. Work was work, home was home, and home was just a place you returned to. But something about the evenings, now the particular quality of being in those rooms with Ryan's closed-door presence and his labeled leftovers and his total, committed seriousness about everything, it made the apartment feel less like a way station and more like somewhere I belonged. I noticed things about him. He read at night. I could see the light under his door. Later than the noise parameter curfew he'd imposed on me. He went for runs at 5:45 in the morning, not 5:30, not 6, and came back flushed and quiet and slightly more human-looking than usual. He had one plant on his windowsill, a small stubborn succulent that somehow survived under his care, and he watered it every Wednesday with the same precision he brought to everything. He had a favorite mug, green glazed ceramic, clearly old, and he never put it in the dishwasher, always washed it by hand. He didn't talk much. When he did, it was usually direct, usually about something practical, but occasionally, and this was the thing that undid me slowly, over weeks, he would say something that was just slightly more than that. A dry observation. A question that was sharper than it appeared. A comment that landed somewhere between a statement and an invitation, and then he'd turn away before I could respond properly, as if he hadn't quite meant to say it out loud. One evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table working on a layout for a project laptop, open papers spread out. The controlled chaos of creative work taking up more space than Rule 36. Shared surfaces must be returned to their neutral state within 2 hours of use, probably allowed. He came in, looked at the spread, and instead of citing the rule, pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. "What's the project?" he said. I blinked. "Rebrand for a restaurant group. They want the new identity to feel warm but modern." He looked at the layouts, said nothing for a moment. "Then, the spacing on that one is off. The eye goes to the left element first and stays there. It's not balanced. I know, I'm trying to fix it. The hierarchy is inverted. The secondary element is more visually dominant than the primary." "I know," I said, slightly more defensively. He tilted his head, looked at it from a different angle. "What if you flip the vertical axis? Move the primary mark to the center, and let the secondary sit subordinate to it." I tried it, stared at it. The whole thing clicked into balance like a key turning. "Huh," I said. "Data visualization," he said, almost apologetically. "I think about how people read information spatially. It's not design, but no, that's exactly it, actually." I looked at him. "Thank you." He nodded, stood up, and then instead of leaving, he went to the kettle and the question just came out of me. "Do you want to sit here while I finish? You don't have to talk. It's weirdly better working with someone else in the room. A pause that went on long enough that I regretted asking. All right, he said. He made 2 cups of that precise pour-over coffee and sat back down across from me and opened his laptop. We worked in silence for 2 hours. It was the most comfortable silence I'd encountered in years. November arrived with rain that turned the city gray and reflective and pushed everyone indoors. The apartment felt smaller, good smaller. The way a room feels when it's warm and the outside is cold and the walls are keeping something worth keeping. We had dinner together for the first time on a Wednesday, not planned. He was cooking. I was hungry and present and hovering near the stove in a way that was probably obvious, and at some point he just got a second plate. We ate at the kitchen table. It was quiet for a while, the comfortable kind rather than the formal kind. Then I asked him something. I don't even remember what, some small question, and he answered and I answered back, and the conversation unfolded itself cautiously. Like something that had been folded for a long time and wasn't entirely sure about unfolding. He'd grown up moving. Different cities, always temporary, always just for now. That was why, he said. The structure. The rules. When everything external is uncertain, you build internal structure. You make the small things reliable because the large things aren't. He said it without self-pity, just as information. The way you'd explain the logic of a system. That makes sense, I said. The 47 rules. People think it's controlling. He looked at me steadily. It's not. It's the opposite. It's reassuring, I said. And then, because this was true, and because the rain was loud against the window and I was feeling more honest than usual, I grew up in houses that were loud in bad ways. Everyone's feelings everywhere, all the time, nothing contained. When I got here and saw the list, my first instinct was to laugh. But honestly, the second instinct was relief. Something shifted in his expression, not softening. He didn't soften, exactly. More like a door opening a precise amount. That wasn't what I expected you to say. What did you expect? That you'd find it oppressive? Most people do. I find it legible, I said. I know what the rules are. I know where I stand. There's no guessing. He was quiet for a moment, looking at me. You broke Rule 14 last night, he said. The television was at 24. I know, I'm sorry. I could hear it, he said, and then so quietly that I almost missed it. I didn't mind. The hallway incident happened again in mid-November, but differently. I'd come back late from a work event, not drunk but loosened, the way you get when you've been social for 5 hours and your edges have blurred. He was already in the hallway when I came in, coming from the bathroom in a t-shirt and sweatpants, barefoot, looking more undone than I'd ever seen him. You're back late, he said. Work thing. I dropped my bag, looked at him. Something about the lateness and the low light made the usual rules feel suspended. You waited up? I wasn't waiting. A pause. I heard the door. Sure, I said, not unkindly. He was close. Closer than Rule 43 allowed, though we'd both quietly stopped observing that 1 week ago. The light in the hallway was dim, just the small lamp at the end of the corridor, and his eyes were doing that river water thing where you couldn't quite name the color. Are you all right? He asked. Yeah, I'm good. It was just, I made a gesture meant to convey the particular exhaustion of performing sociability. He seemed to understand it. Long, he nodded. We stood there a moment, not moving toward each other, not moving away, just existing in this narrow space between our rooms with the rain still going outside and the apartment warm around us. You should sleep, he said. You too, I said. Neither of us moved for a second longer than made sense. Then he said, "Good night, Carol." And my name in his mouth was different from how it usually sounded, more careful, like he was holding it, and he went to his room. I stood in the hallway for a long moment before going to mine. I lay in the dark and thought about the gap between the rules and what he did, the growing space between what he'd written down and how he actually moved through the world when I was in it, the book he'd left, the second plate, the late-night silence that had become a kind of habit, the way he said my name. The rules said 3 feet. His hand on my arm had been anything but. The rules said overnight guests required a written request. He'd never once asked who texted me late at night. The rules said emotional disturbances should be confined to private spaces. But when I'd had a bad week in October, work stress, impossible client, the specific wretchedness of feeling incompetent, he'd noticed, he'd made tea without asking. left it on the counter outside my door, knocked once, and gone back to his room without requiring anything from me. That wasn't in any rule. That was something else entirely. December brought cold that had teeth, and with it, a different kind of closeness. The practical intimacy of two people sharing warmth. We started watching things in the evenings, him at one end of the couch and me at the other. Some television series he'd never seen, and I'd been waiting for an excuse to revisit. The first time it happened, it was casual, unplanned. I was watching something, and he came out for water, and I offered without thinking about it, and he sat down. We observed a careful distance that first night. By the third night, we were sitting somewhat closer. By the second week, there were evenings where his arm was along the back of the couch behind me, not touching, just there. A presence. A warmth. Rule 43 said 3 feet. His arm said something different. I didn't mention it. Neither did he. There is a kind of delicate social architecture to almost moments, and we were both, I think, engineers of deliberate restraint. He more than me, maybe. He built his whole life around structure and containment, but me too, in my way. I'd learned from loud, messy households that wanting something too openly was how you lost it. So we sat on opposite ends of a couch that was growing smaller by the week, and watched television, and did not say the thing that was becoming increasingly, obviously, the thing. One night, the show we were watching had a scene, a reconciliation scene between two characters, quiet and raw and real, the kind of writing that gets you before you realize it's coming. I felt it land in my chest and glanced sideways without meaning to. He was already looking at me. We both looked away immediately. The credits rolled. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Good episode, I said. Yes, he said. Then he said, Carol. His voice, when he said my name like that, weighted, deliberate, carrying something, made my whole body still. Yeah, I said. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Nothing, he said. Good night. He got up and went to his room, and I sat on the couch in the dark and thought that I had never in my life wanted to say no, not nothing, more badly. The first time I nearly said something was a Saturday morning. We'd fallen into a weekend routine without discussing it. He cooked breakfast, I handled cleanup, we occupied the kitchen in a coordinated way that had taken no negotiation, just the quiet calibration of two people learning each other's movements. That morning he was making something elaborate, some kind of egg dish with herbs and roasted tomatoes, and I was sitting on the counter, which was probably against some rule I'd stopped tracking, drinking coffee and watching him. He moved well. I'd noticed this from early on, but it hit me differently some mornings, the way he inhabited space. Economical and precise, nothing wasted, no movement for its own sake. He'd roll up his sleeves when he cooked, and his forearms, I was looking at his forearms. He turned to get something from the cabinet and caught me looking. I looked at my coffee. A pause that lasted too long. What? He said. Nothing. Another pause. You were staring. I was thinking, I said. I just happened to be looking in your direction. He turned back to the stove. A moment of silence. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. You can stare if you want. I don't mind. I looked up. The back of his neck was faintly pink. He did not turn around. I did not say anything. But the word he'd used, mind, had showed up twice now in the context of me. I didn't mind about the television volume. I don't mind about the staring. Ryan Lawson, who minded everything, who had built a 47-point structure around minding things correctly. Ryan Lawson did not mind things when they came from me. That felt important. 3 things happened in December that unmade me, each one a door opening a little wider than the last. The first, he came home from an errand. He ran errands on Saturday afternoons, alone, the same time every week, and he brought me something. Not food, not a book, not the practical secondhand kindness he'd used before. He'd brought me a plant, small in a terracotta pot, a different kind than his succulent something, with small dark leaves that he told me with a startling amount of knowledge about plants would thrive in the amount of natural light my room got and didn't need much attention because he said without looking at me, I figured you'd forget to water it. I'm offended, I said. You forgot to eat dinner 4 times last month. That's different, is it? He put the plant on the kitchen counter. You can keep it wherever you want. A pause. The slight tension around his jaw that I'd learned to read as him choosing his words carefully. I noticed your room doesn't have anything living in it. that seemed, another pause, wrong. I looked at the plant, then at him. Thank you, Ryan, I said. His throat moved. It's a plant, he said. It was the best gift I'd ever received. The second thing, I got sick. Not catastrophically sick. Just the grinding midwinter misery of a bad cold, aching and feverish and unable to get warm, wrapped in every blanket I owned and still shivering, stranded in bed with no energy to do anything useful. I'd texted my friend Petra in the morning with a voice message that was approximately 40% no's, and she'd responded with sympathy and a recommendation for a soup delivery service that she sent me the link to, which I did not have the energy to navigate. I heard Ryan in the apartment, heard the careful, measured sounds of his day. The kettle, his desk chair, the quiet of his work hours. At some point in the afternoon I fell asleep. I woke to a knock on my door. Come in, I said, or tried to. It came out closer to Kamai. The door opened. Ryan stood in the doorway with a bowl of soup and a mug of something steaming, and he looked at me. At the catastrophic blanket situation, the general air of misery, the box of tissues, with an expression that was trying to be neutral and not quite succeeding. You should have said something, he said. You had work, I managed. Carol, he said my name in the particular way he had, the weighted one, and came and set the soup and the mug on my nightstand. The mug was tea with something in it that smelled like ginger and honey. The soup was clearly homemade, not from a can. When you're ill, you say something. There's no rule about that. He looked at me. No, he said. There isn't. He sat on the edge of my bed. Rule 45. Do not touch the other occupant's belongings without explicit verbal permission. And he reached over and put his hand on my forehead. His hand was cool against my skin. The gesture was so natural, so careful, that I felt something in my chest fracture quietly. Still feverish, he said. Drink the tea. Eat what you can of the soup. He didn't move his hand immediately, just held it there for a moment, reading some information only he could interpret. Then he removed it and stood. I'll check on you later. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. He came back at 6 and at 9 and brought water and more tea and managed to get me to eat half a piece of toast by sitting in the chair by my door and simply waiting, with the patience of a man accustomed to time. And that was almost worse than anything, because him sitting there in my room in the lamplight with his work socks and his serious face just present, just staying, made me feel something so big it was hard to hold. Ryan, I said on the third visit, half asleep. Why are you taking care of me? A pause. Because you need it, he said. That's not in the rules, I murmured. Quiet. Then his voice low. No. It's not. I fell asleep before I could reply, and when I woke up, the chair was empty and my water glass had been refilled. The third thing was the party. Petra threw a holiday party. Small, she called it, which meant 40 people in her apartment, but festive and warm, and the kind of gathering where everyone talks louder as the night goes on. She'd insisted both Ryan and I come for separate reasons. Me because I was her best friend, and Ryan because, she'd said, he needed fun injected directly into his personality. He'd surprised me by agreeing. He wore a dark shirt, collar open one button, sleeves rolled. He looked, I need to just say this plainly because I am past the point of being coy about it, devastating. The kind of quietly devastating that doesn't announce itself, just sits there being what it is until you can't not see it. He was quiet at the party. Careful. The way he always was in unpredictable social situations, but he wasn't stiff. He watched things, talked to Petra for a while, talked to 2 of her friends who seemed fascinated by him in the way people are sometimes fascinated by something they can't quite classify. He held a glass of wine and didn't perform anything. At some point in the night I was across the room and I looked over and found him already looking at me. Just looking. Not the way people look when you catch them looking at something casual. Looking the way you look when you've been watching for a while and you know it and you're not moving your eyes. I held his gaze. He held mine. Petra appeared at my elbow and said, very quietly into my ear, Carol. Sweetheart. He is so gone for you. We're roommates, I said. You are also, she said, absolutely an idiot. We walked home together because we lived together, and it would have been strange not to. The city was cold and lit, the particular beauty of winter streets at night, everything a little crystalline. We walked close enough that our arms occasionally touched. Neither of us moved away. Halfway home, he said, I broke a rule tonight. Which one? 31, he said. Emotional disturbances should be confined to private spaces. I looked at him. You seemed fine. I was not, he said. Fine. The way he said it, Ryan. I watched you talk to people all night, he said with the same careful evenness he brought to everything. Like he was presenting data, like he was describing something empirical. Watched you laugh with them. Watched them look at you the way. He stopped. Started again. I am aware that this is outside the documented parameters of our arrangement. My heart was doing something loud. Outside the documented parameters, I repeated. Carol. He stopped walking. I stopped walking. We were on a side street, quiet, a streetlight overhead, making a pool of amber in the dark. He looked at me the way he'd looked at me across the party, steady and direct and with something unguarded in it that I had never seen before. I'm going to say something that isn't in the rules. Okay, I said. I drafted it, he said. Rule 48 approximately 5 times. I kept deleting it because... A breath. Not quite a laugh. You can't put this kind of thing in a rule. It doesn't reduce to a rule. What can't you reduce to a rule? He looked at me. You, he said. I can't reduce you to a rule. Everything I do around you, the food, the book, the plant, the... He made a gesture that managed to encompass all of it. All the small non-rule things, the warm hand on my forehead, the chair in my doorway, the arm along the back of the couch. None of it is in the rules. I break the rules. I keep breaking them. His jaw was tight. Specifically when it comes to you, I break every single one of them. And Ryan, I said, I need you to tell me if this is... Ryan. He stopped. I closed the 2 steps between us. Rule 43's 3 feet. Gone. Gone entirely. And I kissed him. Not careful, not controlled, not the kind of thing you can structure into a rule or contain in a 2-page document. Just him and me and the cold air and his hands coming up to my face after a startled moment, cradling it like I was something he'd been afraid he'd misplace, and his mouth warm against mine. He kissed me back like it was something he'd been thinking about for a long time and had finally been given permission to do properly. When we came apart, his hands were still on my face. Carol, he said. Hi, I said. His expression. I wish I could describe it fully. Some of the careful blankness was gone. What was underneath it was something so much better. Not soft, exactly, not open in the unguarded way, but real. Present. Decided. I'm adding a rule, he said. Right now? Rule 48, he said. Right now? Rule 48, he said. Revised. His thumbs moved slightly against my jaw. No more distance. I laughed. It came out sounding relieved. That's a terrible rule for a man who wrote 43. 43 is rescinded, he said. Then, retroactively. 43 is rescinded, he said. Then, retroactively. Here's what I want to tell you about falling in love with Ryan Lawson. It was not a lightning strike thing. It was not a montage. It was a slow architectural thing, something that was built one small certainty at a time, one deliberate act at a time, until the structure was so solid I couldn't find where it had started. He loved with the same precision and intention that he brought to everything. Nothing careless, nothing offhand. He thought about things. Prepared. The care was always specific. Not a generic gesture, but exactly the right gesture, calibrated to you, to what you needed, to what he'd observed. That attention, God, that attention, being seen by Ryan Lawson, being the subject of that steady river water gaze, turned not analytical but warm. That was something I hadn't known I was missing until I had it. He was still structured. The rules still existed, most of them. We went through them together one evening in January, me on the couch and him at the table, the list between us, and we annotated it. Some survived unchanged. Reasonable things, the kitchen protocol, the utility stuff. Some were revised. Some were crossed out entirely with a pen neatly, him not making a fuss about it. Rule 43, crossed out. Rule 45, do not touch the other occupant's belongings without explicit verbal permission. He crossed that out too and then added in the margin, in his precise handwriting, amendment, Blanket permission granted. Carol Adams, ongoing. I'd laughed until I cried a little. He'd watched me with the expression I'd come to recognize as his happy face. Not a wide smile, not unconstrained, just this quiet, resolute thing. This look that said, "You are exactly where you're supposed to be." He still made the pour-over coffee every morning. The same careful ritual, the thermometer, and the specific timing. He still cooked at 6:30. Still ran at 5:45. Still watered his succulent every Wednesday. Still labeled things. But now he made 2 cups. He left one on the counter for me before I was awake, and the exact temperature was the temperature I liked, which he'd noted without asking about it, that was Ryan. That was exactly Ryan. That was the way he loved, observing, remembering, doing without announcement. He stopped going to his room right after dinner. He stayed. He learned to stop in the middle of a thought when I made a certain face and ask what I was thinking instead of completing his sentence. I learned to just say when something was wrong because he couldn't code switch into indirect emotional communication and didn't apologize for it, and that was good. It was clarifying. I'd grown up with too many feelings and not enough words. He'd grown up with too many words for too few feelings. We were corrective for each other. He told me about the cities one night. All of them. I told him about the house. We sat in the dark on the couch and traded the things we'd both needed to say to someone for a long time. And it was one of those nights you can't plan that. Either happens or doesn't. That becomes one of the fixed points you orient yourself by afterward. At the end of it, he took my hand. Held it with the same quiet certainty as everything else. "The rules," I said quietly, "were never about control." "No," he agreed. "They were about making somewhere feel safe." A pause. Then, "Yes." "Does it?" I said. "Feel safe." He turned to look at me. His thumb moved over my knuckles, once, deliberate. "Yes," he said. "It does now." Months later, late spring, the city warm again, the window in the kitchen open to let in the night air. I found a revised copy of the rules on the kitchen table. Printed. Neat. He'd reformatted it. Most of the original 47 were there, trimmed and annotated. Some sections had been collapsed. Temperature governance had been updated to reflect that we'd negotiated a permanent compromise at 18.5 degrees. We'd actually negotiated, sat down and talked about it like adults, and both felt like we'd won something. Rule 43 was gone. Rule 45 had been replaced. And at the bottom, Rule 48, not deleted, not revised away, was there in full, typed with the same precise formatting as everything that had preceded it. Rule 48. Carol Adams is the exception to every preceding rule, in all cases, without limitation. This supersedes all prior restrictions and is not subject to review. Below it, a note in his handwriting. "This one I'm keeping." I stood in the kitchen and felt the morning light come through the window and land on the paper in my hands, this utterly ridiculous earnest. Completely him. Document, 47 rules and a 48 that broke them all. And I thought about the night I'd arrived with a duffel bag and gotten handed a clipboard instead of a hello. And I thought about how unexpectedly, quietly, permanently, I had come to belong here, in this apartment, in this life, with this man and his river water eyes and his labeled leftovers and his plant and his rules that he broke. Every single one when it came to me. I left a post-it note on top of the list, keeping mine too. End. My strict alpha roommate made 47 house rules. He breaks every single one when it comes to me. Carol Adams and Ryan Lawson. An addendum. The smaller moments that didn't fit in the middle but belong somewhere. There is a moment in early learning. Someone that I think goes unwritten most of the time because it doesn't have the shape of a story beat. It's not the first kiss or the declaration or the grand turning point. It's earlier than that, and honestly, it might matter more. It's the moment you realize you've started protecting someone's feelings before they've asked you to. For me, with Ryan, it was a Thursday in October. He'd had a difficult client call. I didn't know the details. He was private about work, professional in a way that sealed itself. But I could hear it through his closed door. The slightly sharpened edge in his voice that I'd learned meant he was managing frustration rather than not feeling it. When he came out afterward, his expression was the blank he used as armor. Perfectly in place, nothing showing. I was making dinner. Nothing elaborate, just enough. I had the television on low in the background, some documentary about architecture that I'd put on because it filled silence without demanding attention. I didn't ask what was wrong. I didn't turn up the warmth or make it an event. I just made a plate for him too. Rule 32 says nothing about that, there's no rule about it, that's the point, and set it on the table and said, the dining sequence starts in 2 minutes. If you want to watch something that isn't tragic. He looked at the plate. Then he sat down. We watched architects argue about structural integrity for 45 minutes, and he ate everything on the plate and said almost nothing. And by the end of it, some of the armor had come off his face and he looked like himself again, the real underneath version. Thank you, he said when he got up. For what? I said. He looked at me for a moment. Exactly, he said. That was the moment. Not a kiss, not a confession. Just exactly. The understanding that care is sometimes most itself when it doesn't require acknowledgement, when it just makes a plate and asks nothing in return. I've thought about that exchange more than I've thought about much else. There was a period in November where we had a conflict. I want to include this because I think leaving it out would make the story dishonest. Make it feel like Ryan's rules and my adaptability created smooth water all the way down, and that's not what happened. We were two people living closely, coming from different architectures of feeling, and eventually we collided. It was about nothing important. Guest policy. Petra again, specifically her tendency to appear unannounced, and the way I'd started treating the rules as flexible in ways that hadn't been renegotiated. He brought it up the way he brought up everything, directly, stating the issue without preamble. I heard it as criticism. I came back with something sharper than I meant. He went very still, in the way. He went still when he was choosing not to respond from the reactive place, and that stillness made me sharper still. Because I was raised in a house where stillness meant something was wrong. We were cold to each other for a day and a half. On the second evening, he knocked on my door. I was rigid, he said, standing in my doorway, arms at his sides like he'd rehearsed this and was delivering it correctly. The rules exist for structure, not for punishment. When I applied them punitively, that was a slight hesitation. That was wrong. I was careless, I said. I knew the expectations and I let it slide because it was convenient. That wasn't fair to you. A pause. We should renegotiate the guest policy, he said. Agreed. Sit down and do it properly. Both of us. Agreed. Another pause. His expression was still careful, but underneath the careful, there was something young and uncertain in a way that made my chest tight. I'm not good at this, he said. At conflict. I either go rigid or I go nowhere. I don't have a lot of practice with the middle. You just knocked on my door and apologized, I said. That's the middle. Something shifted in his face. Yes, he said, like he was noting something. I suppose it is. We renegotiated the guest policy that night, sitting at the kitchen table with a notepad, both of us slightly too careful and slightly too deliberate, which was the way we both handled things that felt fragile. We compromised. It was the first time I'd compromised with someone and felt, afterward, that both of us had come out with more than we went in with. He wrote it up properly and added it to the document. I initialed my section. The succulent on his windowsill. I want to talk about the succulent. It was there from the first day, already established, already clearly a thing he'd been tending for a while. Small and dark green and unremarkable to look at, except that it was alive, persistently, stubbornly alive under his care. One afternoon in January, maybe 3 weeks after the streetlight, after Rule 48, I was in his room for the first time, having been invited rather than wandering in, and I went to the window and looked at it properly. How long have you had it? I asked. 4 years, he said. He was at his desk reviewing something, but he looked over. I've moved 3 times since I got it. It's come with me. I looked at the little plant. 4 years, 3 moves, a small continuity in all that impermanence. What's its name? I said, because surely this plant had a name. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I don't name things. You named your kettle, I said. He'd slipped once and called it the Francis, and we'd never discussed why. A brief pause. That's different. How? Another pause. I'm not discussing the kettle. I laughed and looked back at the plant, reached out and touched one of the leaves lightly. You should name it, I said. I'll consider it. He did not name it in my presence. But a month later, I noticed there was a very small, very neatly written label stuck to the pot that said, in his handwriting, Carol's suggestion pending. I didn't say anything about it. He didn't say anything about it. He didn't say anything about it. It's still there. The thing about loving someone who communicates in structure and precision is that when they choose words, they mean them exactly, not dramatically, not with performance, but exactly. Ryan never said things he didn't mean, never offered more than he had to give, which meant that everything he gave was real in a way I hadn't always had access to. That particular solid weight of a thing you can trust. When he said he didn't mind, he didn't mind. When he said he'd check on me, he checked on me. When he said no more distance on a cold street with his hands on my face, he meant it forward, into all the days after it. I'd had relationships before that were warmer on the surface and emptier underneath. Relationships where words came easily and meant less. Where I never quite knew where I stood because standing places shifted. I'd thought at various points in my adult life that this was simply how love was. A pleasant uncertainty. A constant rereading of signs. Ryan Lawson, with his 47 rules and his succulent and his precise coffee and his retroactively granted permissions, rewrote that assumption so thoroughly I couldn't find it anymore. Love could be legible. That was what I'd said to him that night at dinner, and I'd meant it about the rules. But it turned out I'd meant it about much more. Love could tell you where you stood. Love could be structured and still be warm. Love could have a document, an absurd single-spaced initial document, and also break every word of it in the places where breaking mattered more. He broke the rules for me, every single one, in every way that counted. And then he rewrote them, carefully, with annotation, with my name in the final clause. Late spring, the window open, the city smelling of warmth and green things. We're in the kitchen. Him at the stove, me at the table with my laptop, and the radio is on low, which is something I introduced slowly in small volume increments over several months, and which he now seems to consider acceptable background rather than noise. He's cooking something that smells like it has wine in it. His sleeves are rolled up. My plant, the one he gave me, is on the windowsill next to his. They're different shapes, different textures, both alive and doing fine in the late afternoon light. He says, without turning around, "You're staring again." Thinking, I say, in your general direction. A sound that, on him, constitutes warmth. What about how I almost found the rules insufferable, I say. He does turn around now, spatula in hand. One eyebrow slightly raised in the expression that is his version of, "Oh really? Almost," I say. "Almost," he repeats. The second instinct was relief, I tell him, which is what I told him that first dinner, and which remains true, and which I think will remain true for a long time. Remember? I told you. He holds my gaze for a moment, sets down the spatula, comes to the table and puts his hand on the back of my chair, bends down and kisses the top of my head. The gesture is so ordinary and so deliberate, so fully his, that I feel it everywhere. "I remember," he says. Then he goes back to the stove. The radio plays. The city comes through the window. The plants on the sill do their quiet work. Rule 48, I think. No exceptions to the exception. No end to the ongoing. Here, I think. Right here. This is where I stand. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe. Comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.